All right, hello. This is a presentation on Ignatius Loyola and the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. Here we will be discussing the early history of Ignatius himself, key ideas of the Jesuit order, and some of the things that they did. So, in his early life, Ignatius Loyola was a military man. He was first a page, and then he became a knight, and he was employed by different relatives at different times in his career as a knight. Knighthood was his life, eat, breathe, sleep, knighthood, and he was driven by the ideas of chivalry and loyalty, as many knights were. This part of his early life is important to mention because it heavily influenced the way he perceived his mission and the entire mission of the Society of Jesus. So, as he was a knight, he was eventually life-threateningly wounded, which caused him to travel back home to rehabilitate. There, he read Ludolf of Saxony's Life of Christ and Flowers of the Saints, and he contemplated them both during his time in solitude. Because of this experience of contemplation, he then decided he would live the rest of his life as a knight for God, fighting for the cause of the gospel. You could say he was aiming to embody a holy type of chivalry, if you will. So the order was founded in Paris sometime during the years 1528 and 1535, while Loyola was in school earning a master's degree. So the establishment of the Jesuit order was not a direct response to the Protestant Reformation, but that doesn't mean that the group was pro-Protestant by any means. Loyola was in fact a Catholic, and more on this and his ideas concerning Protestantism will be discussed in a few slides. So Loyola wanted the Jesuits to be just like Jesus and his disciples and the Apostle Paul, the early church, as it is in Acts. These people were going from place to place to share the gospel. That's what Loyola desired for his group. The Protestant reformers of this time, namely Calvin and Luther, were posing new ideas and interpretations about Christianity and theology, and this was not Loyola's mission. He was way on the other side of the spectrum. His mission was practical, and he just wanted to help souls by bringing them closer to God through evangelism and teaching them how to pray and develop their relationship with God. So, prayer was taught to the Jesuits using Ignatius's own spiritual exercises that he developed, and these exercises include meditations, contemplations, and prayers. They're known to be very, very intense and emotional exercises, demanding much time for retreat, 4 weeks exactly to retreat, and energy and focus from those who are involved in these exercises. So the exercises were originally conducted in a 4-week format with the help of a spiritual mentor in retreat away from everyday life. So, interestingly enough, actually, Protestants today, as well as modern-day Jesuits, and evangelicals still practice these exercises or a variation of these spiritual exercises. There are contemporary books on prayer that are inspired by his exercises, one of which I've provided. There are also translations and commentaries used as a resource for those who are conducting these exercises traditionally, as the Jesuit order today still does. So the second book that I've noted is an 8-week adaptation. And this book I highly recommend for academic and non-academic purposes to just see how you can apply these exercises in your everyday life if you so wish. So, Next, on Jesuit theology, Ignatius deemed Thomas Aquinas as having theological authority over the order. So this is actually very interesting because Aquinas saw theology as a contemplative discipline, strictly to be dealt with the head and reason. And for Loyola, who was very practical, the aim of his ministry was to apply theology practically towards others using the heart. So his view on theology is explained well in this quote that I've provided, which you're welcome to read. And the quote specifically says that theology for Ignatius was not the abstract and speculative discipline practiced by the scholastics of his day. And so I've underlined scholastics because I wanted to emphasize that Ignatius was not a scholastic. He was not like he was not like the reformers of his time, Luther and Calvin. He more so resembled the values of humanists and humanism, and was intentionally opposed to scholasticism because it was associated with Protestantism. In fact, Jesuits were actually conducted specifically to not preach in the scholastic manner, but rather in the humanistic way.
While education is important to Jesuits, yes, theology is not seen as just a thing to be studied and understood. It is also seen as a tool. That tool is used for a very specific purpose, saving souls and promoting the good of society, not just for any one nation, but a universal good. One must be more than just learned in order to properly utilize this tool, however. They must also be disciplined. We will see with the Jesuits, again and again, that discipline is the central pillar to their way of life. To achieve this discipline, one tool, by far the most important tool Jesuits used, was the exercises. Originally written in Ignatius Loyola's The Autograph, the exercises are a program by which one can better come to understand God and their place in the world. It consists of a 4-week retreat of meditations, prayers, and contemplations. Each week is focused on a specific topic relating to the life of Christ. Week 1 focuses on concepts of sin, conscience, hell, and the state of man before Christ. Week 2 is focused on incarnation, the nativity, and also includes a large number of meditations on a much wider variety of topics. Week 3 is focused on the passion and the life of Christ. Week 4, finally, is focused on the crucifixion and resurrection, and also includes a series of prayers afterwards. The exercises were meant to be given to a learner, or group of learners, by another, not performed in true isolation. You could not just buy a copy of the autograph, or find it, or hear about it, or whatever, and go through the exercises yourself. They had to be given to you by someone else who had done them before. The ultimate goal of the exercises, according to Loyola, was, quote, to conquer oneself and regulate one's life without determining oneself through any tendency that is disordered. That last word, disordered, is extremely important here. In this statement, Loyola is affirming that the Society of Jesus is not only an Augustinian order, not only a Catholic one, but a decidedly anti-Protestant one. This shouldn't come as much of a surprise given the Society of Jesus' role in the Counter-Reformation. The need for order here inherently excludes anything even approaching Protestant thought from being considered legitimate or wise or worthy of consideration, as it places the authority of higher ecclesiastical bodies as paramount. From the exercises, one can find a very complete body of what kind of thought makes a good Jesuit. Firstly, as I've mentioned before, is discipline. One had to be obedient unto God, yes, but also unto the Church, and to their superiors within the Society of Jesus. Loyola emphasizes very strongly, almost to the point of claiming that it is a near equal, not quite equal, but a near equal to obedience to God to be obedient to your superiors. This kind of thinking is pervasive within the order, and very intentionally. It is an extension of the militant flair that surrounds the Society of Jesus. It exists to oppose other schools of thought, to be very strong in of itself, resistant to heresy, resistant to dissidents. While it is ultimately a peaceful organization, it can't be denied that there is an extreme degree of militancy about it. It is a natural byproduct of Loyola himself, who was once a soldier. That carried over into his way of thinking about faith. Discipline was not the whole of the Jesuit school of thought, however. For their end goal of saving souls and promoting universal good, education was considered paramount. Loyola was strongly of the opinion that one could not truly utilize or understand theology without a strong background in other subjects as well. As God was in all things, one could not claim to understand matters of God from scriptural studies alone. Not only that, but many Jesuits tended to use education as a tool of conversion. They were often involved in universities, as patrons of the arts, and other roles such as that. While the goal was, ultimately, always, the advancement of the Catholic faith, this was done through educating people about other things alongside that.
Hello, everyone. So, what I'm going to be presenting is I'm going to be presenting some of the things that the Jesuits actually did. Now, the reason the Jesuits are so popular and so influential and important in the Council of Trent and in Catholicism as a whole is because as the membership of the Jesuit order expanded, so did their activities. Now, they opened a number of college and seminaries. They also helped out the poor and poverty centers and also helped out in hospitals. They opened many of their own as well as time passed by. They helped out in women's asylums and in orphanages. They also opened their own women's asylums and orphanages as time passed on. And now, one of the most influential things they did, at least in my opinion, one of the most influential things they did is they started a mission system. And it was something that they spread throughout the African and Asian world. The purpose of these missions was to spread Catholicism to places where Catholicism was either non-existent or hardly existing. Now, one of the many things, the main thing they wanted to do is to convert Muslims throughout the Asian world. But this was impossible as there was still disputes over territory. They couldn't enter certain Asian territories due to Muslim powers overall, and this is more influential in the case of Palestine because this was the main place many of the missionaries wanted to go. Now, one of the missions I want to talk about the most is the mission system in Japan. Now, Saint Francis Xavier, one of the founders of the Jesuit Society, decides he's one of the missionaries that goes over to the Asian world and the African world, and he heads to places like India, China, the Maluku Islands, and Japan. Now, I wanted to talk about Japan because Japan is one of those cases that many people don't seem to talk about. It's one of the more consequential aspects of the missionary system and of the Jesuit order. Now, by the time St. Francis got into Japan, Japan is still a heavily Buddhist and Shinto region. These are the main religions practiced by the Japanese. Now, the Japanese emperor and the Japanese general were mostly hostile towards the missionaries. They didn't want them going in. The missionaries spent many days on the boats waiting to be let in. Though this isn't the first time Europeans would make contact with the Japanese, so in the end, the emperor decided to let the Saint Francis and the missionaries in because he knew that for him, for the emperor, and for Japan, that would mean trade. The main thing that, excuse me, that the Japanese wanted out of the Europeans and out of the Portuguese was actually their firearms. That was the main thing they wanted. And they had this similar reaction to the Buddhists because, as you may know, Buddhism isn't a product of Japan, it's a product of India. So obviously somebody had to introduce it to them. So they had this similar reaction to the Buddhists, though as we see, they will later on become a heavily Buddhist nation. Now, overall, the Japanese emperor was happy with the missionaries, mainly because the missionaries were converting many of the Buddhists into Christians. Now, the reason the emperor is happy with this is actually because at this time Japan is not yet a unified island, it's not a unified state. So many of these Buddhist communities, these Buddhist monks, they hold a significant amount of secular power. And because of this, the emperor is content that these Buddhists, their secular power is being stripped away, transferred. Though he becomes discontent with the Jesuits after discovering that, that the missionaries themselves also had some secular power. And the main thing that upset the emperor of Japan is discovering that the Portuguese were selling Japanese slaves throughout Europe. Now, this was obviously a problem, so in 1587, he ordered the Jesuits out of Japan. Now, many of the Jesuits or the Franciscan missionaries didn't leave. Instead, they went into hiding and spread the word of Christ and Christianity in secret. And in 1597, 26 Christians were publicly crucified, and many of the Japanese followers and missionaries as well were publicly crucified in 1597.
Alright, this slide is about how the Jesuits had some influence on the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was held from 1545 to 1563, and it was split among three sections, or three meetings. A couple of the Jesuits, including Ignatius Loyola, took part in the council as papal theologians. The other members who were not part of the council were assigned by the Catholic Church as missionaries, so they were still holding sermons, going on missions, teaching at schools, and helping in asylums and orphanages. The Catholic Church shared some viewpoints with the Jesuits. This included self-renewal. They wanted to slow down Protestant growth and the spreading of whatever they considered as heresy. They wanted to restore Christian morality and reunite Christians if possible. Since the Jesuits took part of the council, the Catholic Church was influenced greatly by the group and made some changes. The church decided to make sure the clergy was well educated. They formed a laity, which it's I guess a group of church members. They're considered at the bottom of the hierarchy while the Pope is at the top. The laity is still given the opportunity, though, to bring the principles of Christianity to work, home, and school. There's also a catechism called a new catechism called the Canisius. It pretty much just provided questions and answers that would guide people when learning and teaching religion. There were also now bishops who worked in diocese. The diocese is the name of the district of the church that they were in charge of. The goal of reuniting the Christians did not go exactly as planned in the council, so confessionalization distinguished Christianity to the three groups: Lutheran, Calvinistic, and post-Tridentine Roman Catholic. The Jesuits during the Council of Trent. I listed a couple events that occurred during the council, or occurred during and outside of the Council of Trent. The Society of Jesus originally wanted to spread Catholic interpretations of the Bible, but in 1548 they permanently decided to focus on incorporating education and ministries and opening their own schools. One of the schools that was mentioned was in Messina, Italy. Their teachings started to combine Renaissance humanism with Catholic principles. An interesting day I found was 1545. In that year, a woman named Isabella Roser made a vow and told Ignatius that she wanted to become a Jesuit and promote him, and she wanted to invite two of her friends to join the group. During this time, becoming a nun was normal, but becoming a female Jesuit and going on missions was unheard of. Even in 1547, Pope Paul III prohibited female members from joining and prohibited the formation of even a side female group. Another date, 1548, three Jesuit priests were sent on a mission to Africa. In 1548, also a different pope, Pope Julius III, created a bull where he affirmed the society's methods. And in July 1556, Ignatius passed away, but also in that year, the group grew to about 1,000 members and participated in 74 colleges.